Pastor Michael was a young man with big dreams but little means. At 28, he had just started his small church in a rented one-room hall on the outskirts of town. His congregation consisted of a few faithful members who believed in his fiery passion for God. Yet, the reality of running a church hit hard, bills piled up, and the offerings barely covered his rent. To survive, Michael took up side hustles. He worked as a cleaner in a local school during weekdays and sold second-hand shoes at the market on weekends. Despite the struggles, he believed that God would one day reward his faithfulness. His wife, Martha, stood by him, encouraging him to hold on. As months turned into years, Michael's congregation grew only slightly. Neighboring churches, led by popular pastors, flourished, hosting crusades and boasting of miracles. Michael began to feel left out. People often compared him to these pastors, asking why his ministry lacked power. The whispers stung his pride. One evening, after a failed prayer session for a sick member, a frustrated Michael broke down in front of his wife. "Martha, maybe I'm not called to this. How do I explain to people that their prayers aren't being answered?" Martha reassured him, but deep down, Michael's faith wavered. One fateful night, while walking home after a tiring day at the market, Michael encountered a strange man at a dimly lit street corner. The man introduced himself as Mr. Damien and spoke in riddles about power, influence, and success. "You have a gift, Pastor Michael, but you're too humble to use it fully. What if I told you there's a way to transform your ministry overnight?" Michael dismissed him as a fraud, but Damien's words haunted him. Over the next few weeks, his struggles intensified. Congregants began leaving for more powerful churches. Bills piled up, and Martha grew increasingly worried. Michael began to question if God had truly called him. One rainy evening, Michael sat alone in his dimly lit office praying for a breakthrough. As if on cue, Damien appeared at his door, this time more persuasive. "God helps those who help themselves," he said. "You need to tap into higher realms of power to fulfill your calling." Desperate and vulnerable, Michael agreed to meet him later that week. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. Guilt gnawed at his conscience, but the desire to escape his struggles overpowered his doubts. Little did he know, this decision would alter his life forever. The following week, Michael met Damien at an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The room was dimly lit, with strange symbols drawn on the floor. Damien handed Michael a black book, instructing him to follow specific rituals. "These rituals will open doors for you, but you must obey every instruction," Damien warned. Michael hesitated, but desperation clouded his judgment. He took the book home and hid it from Martha. That night, he performed the first ritual, a simple sacrifice of a white goat. As the animal's blood spilled, Michael felt a strange surge of energy. The next Sunday, his congregation doubled, and a wealthy businessman donated a large sum to the church. Michael convinced himself it was God's blessing, ignoring the dark path he had begun to tread. Encouraged by the results, Michael delved deeper into the rituals. He followed the instructions meticulously, sacrificing chickens and performing midnight prayers at the altar Damien had directed him to build. Soon, miraculous events began happening in his church. A blind woman claimed she could see, and a jobless man testified about a sudden promotion. Word spread quickly, and people started flocking to Michael's church. The once empty hall was now overflowing with members. Michael's popularity soared, and he was invited to speak at major conferences. He enjoyed the applause, the gifts and the money, but he avoided looking too deeply into the price he was paying. His wife, however, began noticing changes in him, his late-night absences and the cold distance in their relationship. Damien soon demanded more. "You're now at a level where simple sacrifices won't suffice," he said. Michael was instructed to build a permanent altar in the forest and offer human sacrifices. The first victim was to be a wanderer with no family ties. Michael trembled at the thought but felt trapped by his ambition and fear of losing his newfound power. Late one night, Michael lured a homeless man into the forest under the guise of giving him food and shelter. As the man knelt in gratitude, Michael carried out the horrifying act. His hands shook, but as the blood soaked the altar, he felt an even greater surge of power. The following Sunday, testimonies of healing and deliverance filled his church, and Michael's fame reached new heights. Martha grew increasingly uneasy about Michael's success. She noticed he no longer prayed with the same passion as before. Instead, he spent long hours in his office avoiding her questions. One night, she found a black book hidden in a drawer. The strange symbols and cryptic instructions terrified her. When she confronted Michael, he dismissed her concerns. "Martha, you don't understand. This is the work of God. You should trust me," he said sternly. But Martha wasn't convinced. She began praying fervently for her husband, unaware of the depth of the darkness he was entangled in. Michael's fame continued to grow, but so did the weight of his actions. At night, he struggled with vivid nightmares of blood and cries for help. Though he stood boldly on the pulpit, his soul was crumbling under the weight of guilt. He avoided looking into the eyes of his congregants, especially the ones he had deceived with fake promises. Meanwhile, Martha became more persistent in her prayers, waking up at midnight to intercede for Michael. Her unwavering faith began to unsettle him. He often found her crying in secret, clutching his old Bible. "Martha, stop worrying," he would say, masking his unease with a stern voice. But deep down, her prayers felt like a sharp dagger piercing his conscience. Damon reappeared with another set of instructions, but this time, the demands were chilling. Michael was told to collect personal items, including women's underwear, and offer them on the altar for higher power. Each item represents a soul, Damien explained. The more souls you control, the stronger your influence will become. Michael hesitated but eventually obeyed. He devised schemes to obtain the items from female members of his church under the pretext of spiritual cleansing. Many trusted him and complied without question, believing it was part of their deliverance. The results were instant. Michael's popularity skyrocketed. Large crowds gathered every Sunday, and his church expanded into a massive auditorium. Yet, he felt more alone than ever. Despite his outward success, Michael's life began to unravel. He became paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder, convinced someone was watching him. His health deteriorated, and he developed unexplained rashes and headaches. When Martha suggested seeing a doctor, Michael snapped, accusing her of doubting his faith. Martha, however, refused to give up. She began seeking counsel from trusted elders in the Christian community, sharing her fears about Michael's drastic transformation. Though she kept her suspicions vague, one elder, Sister Grace, advised her to fast and pray intensively. "Evil cannot hide forever," Grace assured her. One evening, after a powerful service, Michael was approached by an old man with a piercing gaze. "Pastor Michael," the man said, "be careful what you sow, for the harvest will surely come." Michael froze, unsure if the man was a prophet or a spy. Before he could respond, the man disappeared into the crowd. Michael dismissed the encounter as irrelevant, but the words echoed in his mind. That night, he dreamt of a barren field where he toiled endlessly, only to reap thorns and ashes. When he woke up, sweat drenched his body, and fear gripped his heart. Yet, he chose to ignore the warning signs, determined to hold on to his ill-gotten success. Michael's paranoia worsened. He grew suspicious of everyone around him, even his wife. He stopped confiding in Martha and surrounded himself with loyal assistants who only praised him. The once loving pastor had become a distant, authoritative figure. His sermons became more about miracles and less about salvation, as he avoided topics that could expose his secrets. Despite his efforts, cracks in his ministry began to show. Members whispered about unexplained disappearances in the community, and some women began questioning the strange rituals involving their personal items. Michael brushed off the rumors with charm, but deep down, he knew his empire was built on lies, and it was only a matter of time before it came crashing down. Martha's prayers grew more intense as she sensed a storm brewing. One night, while cleaning Michael's office, she found a hidden compartment under his desk. Inside were items that made her blood run cold: women's underwear, strange charms, and a blood-stained dagger. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the extent of Michael's deception. Confronting him that night, she demanded answers. "Michael, what have you become? This isn't the man I married," she cried. Michael, cornered, lashed out. "You don't understand what I've been through. Everything I've done was for this family and this church," he shouted. But Martha's silence spoke volumes. She packed a small bag and left for her parents' house, vowing to keep praying for him but unable to stay under the same roof. Without Martha, Michael's life spiraled further out of control. Damien returned with more demands, warning that failure to comply would result in dire consequences. Michael was told to sacrifice someone he deeply loved. He recoiled at the thought but dared not defy the dark forces he had pledged allegiance to. On Sunday, during a packed service, Michael attempted to perform a miracle for a wheelchair-bound woman. But instead of rising, she screamed in agony and collapsed. The congregation panicked and whispers of fraud filled the air. That night, Michael received an anonymous message: "Your secrets are coming to light." A week later, a local journalist released a damning report about Michael's ministry. Witnesses came forward, accusing him of exploitation and bizarre rituals. Pictures of the strange items found in his possession leaked online, causing a media frenzy. Michael's once loyal congregation dwindled overnight, and his trusted assistants abandoned him. Michael locked himself inside his mansion, refusing to eat or speak to anyone. He was no longer the powerful man of God he once portrayed. Instead, he was a broken man, haunted by his past and terrified of the future. Damien, however, remained silent, leaving Michael to face the consequences of his choices alone. Michael's once luxurious home now felt like a prison. Shadows seemed to move in the corners, and eerie whispers filled the silence of the night. He avoided mirrors, unable to face the reflection of the man he had become. He could no longer deny the consequences of his choices. His fame, wealth, and miracles were all illusions built on evil. One night, in a fit of desperation, Michael attempted to burn the black book Damien had given him. But as the flames engulfed it, a chilling voice echoed through his house: "You cannot escape the covenant." The book remained unscathed in the fire. Terrified, Michael collapsed to the floor, sobbing. He realized that his life was no longer his own. Damien returned, but this time, his demeanor was cold and menacing. "You have failed to fulfill your part of the bargain," he said. "The altar demands the blood of someone dear to you. If you refuse, everything you cherish will be destroyed." Damien handed Michael a knife and left without waiting for a response. Michael was paralyzed with fear. He thought of Martha, who had left him but still prayed for his salvation. He thought of his estranged family, the people who once trusted him. But as he stared at the knife, a thought pierced through his despair: what if he could turn back to God? The idea seemed impossible, but it was his only glimmer of hope. In a moment of desperation, Michael fell to his knees and cried out to God for the first time in years. "Lord, I don't deserve your mercy, but please save me. I can't do this anymore." His voice cracked as tears streamed down his face. For hours, he prayed and confessed his sins, pleading for a second chance. Suddenly, a knock came at the door. It was Sister Grace, the elder Martha had confided in. "God sent me to you," she said firmly. "The blood of Jesus is stronger than any covenant with darkness. Are you ready to renounce your ties to evil?" Michael nodded, though fear gripped his heart. Together, they began a session of fervent prayer and deliverance. As Grace prayed, the room filled with an unbearable heat. Damien appeared, furious and determined to claim what he believed was his. But Grace stood her ground, declaring the authority of God over Michael's life. A violent struggle ensued in the spiritual realm, with Michael caught in the middle. After what felt like hours, Damien let out a piercing scream and vanished. The black book erupted into flames, this time turning to ash. Michael, though freed, was left scarred by his choices. He publicly confessed his sins, returning all the wealth and properties he had acquired through deceit. Many rejected him, but a few, including Martha, forgave him and stood by him as he began rebuilding his life. Though humbled and broken, Michael became a cautionary tale, warning others of the dangers of greed and the consequences of turning away from God.